All right, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor and Chief Content Officer at MediaOps, and I'm the moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your please use your interface and the question and answer tab and go ahead and get your questions in, and we will try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is how to reduce enterprise application security risks. Our speakers today are Jeffrey Martin, who is the Associate VP of Product Management at WhiteSource, and Lilach Aviad, who is the Director of Product Marketing at WhiteSource. Hey guys, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's always fun.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. So, Lilach, I know you're going to get us started with a conversation. I'm going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute, and let you guys just dive right on into it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shirley. So, hi, everybody. What we're going to discuss today is actually how to reduce the application, the enterprise application security risks. What we're going to share with you is actually the results of our research report that we conducted together with Ponemon Institute, in which we surveyed over 634 IT and IT security practitioners who are familiar with the organization approach to securing applications. This is actually a follow-up report to a previous one done in 2015. And what we're going to share with you today in this webinar are the findings, some trends comparing the results we found this time versus the previous one, and some interesting insights comparing the high-performing organizations versus the overall organizations that we surveyed. So let's start. First of all, why are applications more vulnerable than any other area? So basically, it's all a matter of numbers. In fact, there are thousands of applications that are active at any point in time, and several hundreds of them are considered to be mission critical for the organization. And therefore, from that derive the high risk of those applications and the risk to the enterprise while operating them. So let's directly dive into all the findings. So first and foremost, what you can see here is that it seems that when we compare our findings from 2015 to this finding at 2020, overall we can see that our people surveyed found that the risk of application is a top security objective within the organization. There is a growing awareness to the risk among application security. Jeff, why do you think? I mean, is this sounds like a positive thing, but where do you see this trend going?
So it's interesting to me. First off, I found most of the results here pretty fascinating, including the one you just mentioned about how many applications. These just 634 people had 2,500 or so applications, 30% of which are business critical. That is a lot of applications per product, per organization. And I think this is actually one of the reasons that's driving why protection of these applications is a top security objective. Those numbers were not the same 5 years ago. People have more applications now. We are more dependent on it. And just kind of bluntly, we all live our lives through applications now, whether it's business or otherwise. So of course the security's gone up, the concerns rather. Now, fundamentally, I think this is just going to keep going. This is not something that's going to stop. With all of our data living inside applications of one kind or another, security is and should be an increasing priority.
Okay. Thanks a lot. So we actually asked respondents what hacks concerns them the most. And what you can see here, that there are 3 areas which increased dramatically, among which applications and devices have shown the highest increase of all. What do you think are the drivers for this increase, Jeff?
So this might be my favorite slide, honestly, because it says something that I've thought, but now there's some data behind it. Increasingly, when we're talking about securing, let's just say data, most of the older ways, the non-application ways, are now becoming pretty solidly commoditized. Network security, for example, it's not a solved problem, I don't want to say that, but it is a more solved problem. That industry has been around longer, it is more mature. We know how to secure a network as an industry. Same thing with devices, is getting a little bit crazier, but websites start secure now, right? That's why you see that giant drop, 25 to 10. That is a huge drop in 5 years because we have, in general, basically made our website designs more secure. Is it still a concern? Sure. Is it less of a concern? Absolutely. That sort of leaves as the last big attack vector the applications themselves. And because those are, frankly, more, let's say, complex, and because those are one of the last easy attack vectors, the concern goes up. So I actually think this is a function as much as maybe application security becoming an increasing concern. I think it's actually also a function that network and device security are almost a decreasing concern. Devices are a little weird because it depends on what you mean by device, and everybody's got their own definition because, insecure devices could be network layer problems or application layer problems. I think a large chunk of the responses for hacks through insecure devices mean the application layer of the device, not the hardware or network.
So now that we have basically established that everybody agrees that applications are a growing concern, it was very interesting to see what are the differences between the perceived risk to the allocated budget. And what is amazing is that while applications are considered to be the top or the highest risk, in terms of budget allocated, they are actually given the less amount of money, while networks are actually showing exactly the opposite picture, right? A low concern, low risk, but very substantial portion of the budget. What do you think this gap represents, or where does it come from?
This is kind of almost counterintuitive, but based on all the conversations with large enterprises I've had about security in general and application security specifically, I think the main reason is they know where to spend the money on networks. Like I said, it's not quite a solved problem, but at least there's a generally accepted framework of how you have to do it. There's certain tools you're going to have in place, firewalls and the like, and you know where to spend your money to reduce the risk there. So as a result, they spend the money. All of us are businesses. It's all ROI calculations. We know what the return on our investment is in network security. That means you're more willing to part with the money, and it becomes sort of a ground stakes rather. Everybody has to play by those rules. All competitors have to spend that money. With applications, it's kind of the opposite problem. We know there's more problems, but we don't know where to spend the money. And the easy solution for that is to give it to me. But the more complex solution to that of where to spend the money is you need to identify the right tools, the right practices, the right people with the right skill sets that you need to bring in. And as a maturity, as an industry, I should say, our maturity isn't at the point where we really understand that for applications. So people are more hesitant to spend the money because there's not really a clean consensus of where it should go. There's a few data points that we all say we got to check off, but those are just data points right now. They're not the full practice. You kind of see this too in a kind of interesting way, I think, on the endpoint security as well, right? Because people know where to spend the money there. That's why it's gone up. So in summary, applications, we know there's a lot of risk. We don't know where to go mitigate that risk, and we don't know the ROI on the spending there, so people are less likely to go spend.
So would you project, if I give you a crystal ball and I would ask you to guess what would be the trend looking at 2025, for example, would you expect this gap to be reduced, to be further reduced, significantly reduced?
As somebody who sells software application technology for securing it, I really hope that gap goes down. That's what we make. But I actually do think, big picture, that is going to fall down. As we become more mature about it in the next 5 years, you'll see kind of that red line start catching right up to that blue line. Because we'll know where to spend the money, so we spend the money. But also because as we spend that money smartly, the risk starts going down. So it should start balancing out. And, it might still be the number one concern for everybody because it's still a newer maturity. But I think that over the next few years, you'll see a general consensus of what the application stack needs to look like for security.
Okay, thanks. Let's move to a different layer that we have researched, which is how organizations are addressing vulnerabilities in their enterprises. Basically, we were really interested in knowing what kind of processes exist within organizations in terms of the SSDLC. What we see is that, again, comparing to 2015, the level of formality has increased pretty dramatically. From 19 to 33 actually have a formal and structured approach. However, Jeff, I could still say that, it's about only 50% that have some formality to it, while the other half has something that is very unstructured, ad hoc, or not existent at all.
First, let me define SSDL. I can't say that acronym quite right.
Secure Software Development Lifecycle.
Yes. For some reason, the two S's really mess me up going SS, whatever. What was the question again? No, I'm joking. Look, this to me makes sense. This is something that I would have predicted just based on my own conversations with people, both in the industry and just in general in software. We know more about what we need to do, and we know that it needs to be a structured approach for the SDLC, especially when it comes down to security. I'm going to avoid that acronym for now. So we know more. So of course we've gone and adopted more structured approaches. What's kind of interesting to me is that there's actually an increase of the none of the above, and there could be some sampling there, right? Like, look, 3 to 4%. So maybe it's better to say that it's about the same number. I can't understand that, to not even have an ad hoc approach to securing your software development lifecycle. It doesn't quite make sense. I'd love to go meet and have a beer with a couple of those people and just ask what they're thinking, because I honestly can't think of any software that doesn't need to have some level of approach in their SSDLC. And even an ad hoc approach is better than nothing. I will say there's an interesting trend there for the people who went from ad hoc to formal structured approaches. I think it's really just a factor of our education in the marketplace of making sure that people understand the importance. I also think it's a factor of big, high-profile breaches driving executives to, as a board, mandate we must be secure. Too high of a damages to not being secure, and too low of a cost to actually ensure that security.
Okay. When we actually asked, is security adequately emphasized during the development cycle? These are the answers that we got. Now, we see some, I would say, minor increase in answers in people who answered yes versus no. But actually, Jeff, given the previous slide where we saw a significant increase in the formal approach, I would have guessed that we should have seen a more significant increase here as well. Don't you think?
Yeah, I understand why this is counterintuitive. And it is, because what's the right way to phrase this? We know better how bad we're doing. Is that the right way to say that? I'll go with that. I think basically what happened is in the last 5 years, everybody understands more about what they need to do. And so they are understandably saying we're not focusing enough on it. And in the past, there was more, okay, we know what we got to do. We're fine. So I think that's why the answers for yes went up, but no was still, and unsure was still pretty steady. It's because I think despite all the gains we've made, all that we've really accomplished is understanding how far we have to go.
Okay. And that takes us maybe to the next question that we surveyed about, understanding what is difficult and very difficult, why it's difficult or very difficult to remediate vulnerabilities. And what we can see here, again, compared to the previous research, is that overall there is a decline in all parameters, with lack of qualified personnel maybe declining the most. But when I look at the actual numbers, it seems to me like there is still a substantial difficulty out there when we talk about remediating vulnerabilities. How come? Aren't we making any progress?
No. So it's one of these, like, it's a race condition, right? We're trying to go fix an increasing number of vulnerabilities. There's more. And there's more threats that pop up, not less. At the same time, I think the definition of the word quickly has also modified itself over the past 5 years. Whereas quickly might have been measured in days 5 years ago, it's measured in minutes nowadays. So I understand reasonably why more of the focus here is on, let's just say, as a relative spread, it's still on how do we fix the problem fast? How do we find the problem fast? That's where it should be. I think, interestingly to me, is that the lack of qualified personnel had such a drop. That's a huge drop, in my opinion. I think it's great. It's a good sign for the future that we're training people and providing personnel that can handle this. I'm a little surprised that it fell that much, to be honest. But 5 years is an eternity, and it's good that it fell, and I'm glad that we're actually going that direction. But look, the fundamental problems don't change, right? We might get slightly better at all of them, but the fundamental problems are still, I need to detect the problems quick. I need to fix them quick. I need to find the holes and then fill the holes. It's that simple.
Okay, understood. So if we ask about the security debt, about how long does it take to remediate all this backlog, for how long does it stay? I think this one, I don't know if it's shocking, but at least it's concerning. It shows that about 1/3 of the people, the organization, never completely remediate the entire backlog. They always have a security debt. And if I'm looking at the median here, it's about 9 weeks, more or less.
Yeah, I have a controversial opinion on this.
Share with us.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to say that. Walk away. So, look, I do have a pretty controversial opinion on this. I actually think everybody should be saying their backlog is not completely remediated. The only way to have a fully remediated backlog is to stop looking for problems. And that doesn't happen. I'm a product person. If one of my product managers came to me and said, I have no feature requests in the backlog, my answer would not be great. My answer would be, what do you mean? That means you're not talking to customers. And the same thing applies to security. If you're completely remediated and you think you've got all your vulnerabilities fixed, you are not looking for your vulnerabilities. That's the only way that's possible. What's that old phrase? You know, the only way to not screw something up is to not do anything. That's basically true here. That said, because you can never completely, fully remediate it, that shouldn't be a goal. The goal should be to reduce your risk in a smart way from the backlog that you have. And that should be a continual cycle, and it should be prioritized. And there's a lot of ways to prioritize those vulnerabilities. Simple things like just vulnerability scoring, right? CVS scores. Not CVS scores, that's how you rate a pharmacy. CVSS scores, which is how you rate a vulnerability. Or more complex things like the area of the business that the application is in, or the purpose of the library itself. Obviously, credit card information and things that are processing that have a higher risk potential than something that's doing just a minor transform of data. So fundamentally, it's good to see that so many people are fixing these things. A remediation cycle that takes 5 to 6 weeks is 6 weeks too late. This needs to be driven much, much more towards 1-2 days tops. Vulnerabilities get attacked right away. They do not get attacked 6 weeks later. And anybody who's focusing on remediation should be answering this question a little differently, which is, how long did it take me to remediate my high priority backlog in the areas of risk that I've identified? And then maybe how long does it take me to remediate the medium risks? So without putting that information in here, it can be misleading. But honestly, the goal for everybody should be to handle the high priority risks pretty much immediately, which I would define as a day or less.
Okay. So let's, capture a little bit the finding of this section. It understood that more organizations need to establish a formal structured approach to their secure software development lifecycle, and to incorporate the security into the SDLC in a way that will enable applications with a higher security and making security a top consideration in their development cycle. Let's move to our last section, in which we actually divided the respondents to high-performing organizations, which perform highly in terms of security, application security, and compare them to the overall. And I think there are some interesting insights we can derive from that. The first thing is really that we see that high performers are truly more likely to make the protection of application a priority, which means they're more likely to actually have a top security objective, to take steps to ensure the security during the SDLC. But what we also see is that it is still difficult for them to reduce the risk of applications. And maybe that corresponds with what you said earlier, Jeff, and what we discussed earlier, that, they're more structured. However, there is still relatively high level of difficulty out there, even among the high-performing organizations.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. And by the way, I'm just going to throw a little thing in there. Throw some questions in, guys. It's a lot more fun back and forth. I'm selfish. But look, fundamentally, I think it's pretty obvious that high-performing organizations care more about security. That seems to make sense to me. The other thing is high-performing organizations tend to be better resourced. The causality here is a little fuzzy, right? Because high-performing organizations tend to have more resources to devote to actually handling things like this, but also handling things like this is now a way of becoming a high-performing organization. So it's a good virtuous cycle there. Fundamentally, there's another aspect to this, which is non-high-performing companies tend to say things like, this is difficult. Yes, it is difficult. I'm not implying that all non-high performers complain, but I think it's a good activity. It's a good indication of a high performer when they just solve problems and they try to. But look, it is actually pretty difficult to reduce the risk if you don't understand what the risks are. And I think that's the investment that a lot of these non-high performing companies aren't investing in. They are not detecting on the application layer security vulnerabilities. And if you don't detect them, you can't measure the risk. And if you can't measure the risk, you can't reduce the risk. So to me, it's the non-high performing companies aren't taking that initial step. What do I have for problems that I need to fix? And once they understand that, the solutions actually start becoming more obvious. It's that initial cliff you got to jump over to actually see them all. And personally, I hear from some companies that I might not consider high performing. You hear things when you're talking to them like, well, if we start measuring the risk, that's going to be a problem because then we'll have to fix it. And that is the most backwards thinking I've ever heard. You can't put your head in the sand and pretend the risks aren't there just so that you don't have to deal with them. And I do think that's something of a problem in some organizations. It can be. Usually, by the way, I don't hear that from like developers. You hear that from the executive types. Oh, I don't want to know what those problems. Then we'll have to fix them. Not a good executive, I'm going to say. Taking a controversial stance there. I'm just bashing people left and right. Executives, now you're all a problem. But Lilach, I mean, you talk to a lot of these people too. Do you agree? Do you see this within the high performing organizations differently? Is it just the approach? Is it the resources? I'm just curious what your take is.
I think it's a combination actually of the approach and a can-do approach. Let's call it this way. I must say though that I feel even among the high-performing organization, I would say there is some sort of a feeling that maybe the solutions that we currently have are not yet perfect for them or don't fully answer all their needs. And that might be part of the reason why the level of difficulty that we see here, I think throughout, is still relatively high, even among those who are considered to be at the top, as top notch of application security. I'm not sure if you agree with me, Jeff, or not.
I mean, generally, sure. In this specific case, yes. But
generally, never. In this case, I do. Okay.
But I will say, I do think one of the things that is interesting to me is how this ties into some of the previous slides, right? Which is, I think a lot of times we still don't really have a good handle on the problem. And the lack of a just agreed upon general solution in the space for application security, period. I mean, I've heard 3 million different processes out of the 3 million company. Everybody's got a different one. You don't hear that in other areas of security, right? Network security, everybody sounds pretty much the exact same. And I think this is partially due to, like I said, the industry just not being there yet. It's still maturing. But I also think it is a little bit because of this. People who don't know what risks they have, or they think that they're doing an okay job in solving it, that's increasingly becoming kind of a problem, for lack of a better word.
I agree 100%, and I would also like to say that this actually strengthen, or let's say lives very well with our previous research that we have done about the DevSecOps insights. You can, for those who are interested, you're welcome to visit our site. You can download it. That showed exactly the same findings in terms of how important it is to have a formal approach, how important it is to integrate the security into the development, how important it is to have a security focal point among the developers, and so forth. So I think overall, I do see some very obvious repeated trends and insights throughout, the people I meet and the researchers that I've had the chance to do.
Yeah, and I mean, look, everybody's a little bit different on the maturity journey, right? And I think high performers are generally a little bit farther along. And that's really what I was getting to, right? If you look at the maturity model for application security, it really starts with just knowing what you have, being able to identify things that are vulnerabilities, being able to prioritize those, like we talked about earlier, with why people are like, what the backlog is. You should have to be prioritizing those to make sure you solve them quickly, and then ultimately you actually have to know how to fix it, which is sort of the last step of that maturity journey. And I think everybody's in a slightly different place, but it's definitely fair to say that the high performers are farther along that journey.
Right. Okay. So let's continue a little bit.
Yeah, man, I missed the chance for a perfect transition. I just talked about fixing the vulnerability. Sorry, just my own little webinar brain going. Damn it, I missed one.
Here, I'm giving you a second chance.
All right, hold on, we'll backtrack. There we go. Here. So, it's very important that we, the last stage of that maturity journey is the remediation and the vulnerability remediation to be able to actually fix the problems once you have it, which brings us to the next slide. There we go. I feel better.
It was such a smooth transition, Jeff. So, again, this is a question we asked everybody, but it was interesting to see what were the differences between the high-performing organization to the overall, and what they found to be, more difficult than others. So overall, I think you could see that the high-performing organization gave every reason a lower ranking than the overall, except for one, which was the lack of enabling security tools. What can we understand from that, Jeff? How do you explain this?
I actually think it fits perfectly with the narrative, I guess, we've sort of been crafting here, because they know what they need. That's really what it boils down to. They know where the problems are, and they start looking for solutions, and they can't find solutions all the time. So they understand that the lack of tooling is a problem for them. And that's just probably not as big of an issue if you don't know what you're missing. I think there's some other interesting pieces in here. Personally, I kind of like the lack of qualified personnel being higher overall than in higher performers. Big shock. I don't know if everybody knows this, but high-performing organizations do better at recruiting qualified people. Because qualified people like to work at high-performing places. So I'm not too shocked at that difference there, but I am 100% certain it's connected to lack of resources. You can't bring in the qualified people if you're not spending, basically. It's interesting because I think it means the high performers understand they need to allocate resources for this, both for personnel and tooling. And they're trying to offset some of that personnel cost with better tooling, to be honest. Again, number 1 and 2 is always going to be being able to quickly detect things and fix them. But that lack of enabling security tools, it's a real problem because high performance, from a company level at least, usually means automation. Tooling is necessary for automation. You cannot automate people yet. We'll get there. Ask me that question in 10 years. Maybe we can automate the people. But.
Yeah. So I think that maybe to come a full circle, that actually takes us to our last takeaway from the research, which takes us to the beginning. And
no, you had a good transition. That was perfect. Look at that.
Sometimes I'm successful. Yeah. And if you remember, we started by sharing the answers, the overall answers of the different layers of security and what organization perceive as the most concerns them. And what we can see here, that before we said that the application layer was the most concerning one, but what we can see here, that among the high-performing organization, this is even more extreme, okay? That they perceive the application, the HEX2 application, as an even higher risk than the overall organization. And I think maybe that goes back to what you said, it's being at a more advanced stage of the maturity level, that you are actually makes you capable of realizing the level of risk and the level of tools and the level of attention that you need to dedicate to this specific layer.
You don't go lock your door if you don't know it's unlocked.
A good point. I'm not sure whether it's me or Jeff.
I think Jeff got frozen there.
Okay. Yeah, I see that we lost Jeff in the process. I'm sure he will be here. He's back.
Yes, Jeff.
All right, I don't know what that was.
Jeff,
It disconnected me, but I could hear you. That's fine. I was just scaring you.
That's fine.
I have no clue when I got cut off, but I will say that, look, this should be a factor of education, right? People know now versus, people who are paying attention, the educated people, the people who care about the problems, they understand that the application layer is insecure. And the ones who aren't paying attention or don't have the resources to pay attention, the general populace versus high performers, they don't know what they don't know. And so they think of the more traditional things as being an issue, right? Insecure devices and things like that, or the network layer. Whereas high-performing organizations already solved that problem, spent the money, like we saw on the very first slide, and just solved it. And so they're not as concerned about it as their unsolved problems. All sounds very obvious, but it does sort of speak towards where we are in general with people beginning to pay attention and the people with resources really paying attention, but to insecure applications. But fundamentally, we still have a long way to go, and they still have a lot of problems they have to solve.
Okay. So just to summarize, maybe the best practices of high-performing organization is, again, to establish a formal, structured approach to the secure software development lifecycle, ensure that security is built into the design and the development phase, and of course, that both teams, the development and the security, collaborate properly within the organization. Otherwise, instead of solving problems, it actually creates more of those or complicates already existing problems. And with that, Jeff, I hand it over to you to give us an overall conclusion.
Oh boy. I'm not the best at concluding things. I keep going. Anyways, look, fundamentally, I think we've laid out the narrative here, right? People are still deeply concerned about detecting their vulnerabilities quickly and fixing them. Weirdly, people tend to focus on the fixes before they worry about the detection, but at least they're both of the top two. There's this other issue here of collaboration between application development security teams. We didn't talk much about that, but I think it's an important insight too. And it's one of the pieces that I think differentiates a high-performing organization from not. High-performing organizations work more on things like collaboration, data sharing, tool integration, and they tend to collapse that DevOps versus security into single sourcing. Your developers own everything, including the security. Security teams are there to assist them, as opposed to being a double check. Again, same other piece here. Non-high performing organizations don't adequately emphasize security, partially because they don't have the resources to, partially because they don't know what problems they're avoiding. They don't know what problems they're not fixing, I guess the right way to say that. And partially just due to good old-fashioned not knowing what they don't know. And then I think it is very important to mention again that we're spending on the things we know the solutions to, networking, things like that. The level of spending in the secure application development space needs to go up and will go up. And then look, since in the last 5 years, fewer people are, I'm sorry, let me phrase that. I'm going to rephrase this sentence here. Most organizations still aren't doing enough in terms of secure application development, especially inside of their tooling, especially inside of their actual SDLC, but they aren't doing enough in general. And I think the big trend is we at least now know more about what we're not doing. Convoluted sentence. That's never going to work as a bumper sticker, is it? We know more about what we're not doing. That's not good. So I guess with that said, do some Q&A?
Sure.
Yeah, we can do some Q&A. Guys, there's plenty of time for question and answer. If you have a question for Jeff or for Lilach, please go ahead and use your question and answer tab. Go ahead and put it on in there, or you can use the chat, whichever works best for you. But we do have a couple that have come in so far, so let me just dive right on in. What would you say are the main drivers for the trends we see between 2015 and 2020?
Main drivers. Everybody's older.
Well, there
Sorry,
is that.
That was a horrible joke, right? Look, geez. Anytime you hear the word driver in 2020, it starts becoming a discussion about pandemics, right? Mm-hmm. But I actually don't think that necessarily had a big impact here. Look, the biggest driver is, in all honesty, education. We know more. We've also solved some of those other problems like network security. I hate saying it's a solved problem, but it is a known problem with a known solution and just some difficulties. We've addressed some of the other pieces, which puts the focus for the bad actors squarely on the application layer because everybody's protecting everything else, right? They're going to go in through the open window if they can. So that means it's one of the last frontiers for us. Suddenly I became a Star Trek, but it's the final frontier for software development in a secure way is the application layer. And that understanding is driving all those trends that we talked about.
Excellent. All right, next question. Let's see. And there's plenty of time, guys. If you have a question for Jeff or for Lilach, go ahead and use your Q&A tab there. Next question. What are the reasons? Let's see. What are the reasons for the differences between high-performing organizations and the overall organizations? And I know you guys discussed this somewhat in your conversation, but maybe it's worth talking about it again because I think it's super important.
Yeah, Lilach, you want to take that one? I'll let you go for one. I just love throwing you on the spot.
No problem at all. So I think the main difference is actually the maturity level and the knowledge or the realization of what they know and what they don't know, and therefore the perception of the risk and the necessity of doing a proper security to their applications. And with that maturity level and approach comes a proper allocation of budget, a better choice of tools, a more inclined culture to invest in more tools, better cooperation between the security and the development teams, a more structured, formal process of incorporating the security into the SDLC, all the things that we have mentioned throughout our webinar today. And the overall result of that is actually that they're managing to significantly reduce their risk in the applications. But it's a combination of, first and foremost, awareness, and like Jeff said, knowledge and education, and being willing to deal with this challenge and address it, and not overlook to the other side and continue to do what we already know to do, and tackle the things that we know less about and we still need to learn and improve.
See, told you I was bad at concluding. She's better.
Survive the tackle, Jeff.
One thing I did notice that throughout your presentation, you guys didn't use the term DevSecOps, and if you did, it was maybe just once or twice. So is there a reason why you didn't approach this from kind of that DevSecOps conversation?
It's an interesting one. So to me, it's sort of, what's the right way to say it? Fish don't talk about water. I think that might be honestly the reason I didn't mention it even once, is I'm assuming that for the most part, any organization that cares about security is approaching this from a more DevSecOps perspective. And maybe I shouldn't make that assumption. I guess it's the perils of being in the industry and living and breathing it. Like I said, fish don't talk about water. To me, that transformation is part of that maturity journey. Mm-hmm. And I think most people are, again, on that transformation somewhere. It is that combination that matters. But I hope that's in the groundwater everywhere by now.
Yeah, well, I ask because to your point, we're in the space, and so we kind of think, live and breathe DevSecOps. And I think a lot of people, a lot of organizations are still very much in that transformational journey, and they may be closer to the beginning than they are the end. Not that there is an end to DevOps or DevSecOps, but at what point can an organization actually say, yes, I'm doing DevSecOps, or yes, we have adopted DevSecOps principles, and then consider themselves a high-performing organization? Because I don't think a lot of organizations kind of understand where they are in their journey. And
and we touched on it very briefly there with like the talking about the collaboration between the application and security teams. Realistically, the only way to actually do that collaboration correctly, look at me just taking a very firm stance, is to approach it from a DevSecOps perspective, where you're embedding security inside your DevOps team in the same way you've embedded ops. There isn't another better approach to that than DevSecOps, right? Good calling me out for just sort of not mentioning the ocean that I'm swimming in, but yes.
I wasn't trying to call you out. I was just wondering,
reminding me.
If we've decided that maybe as an industry, DevSecOps just, isn't really, is no longer
important anymore.
Exactly.
I think it's bigger than that. It's become so important. It's now just the ground stakes. Which I think I'm using that phrase wrong, but I'm going to go with it.
How about table stakes? So.
Table stakes. Thank you. I don't know what
That's all right. It's one of those days, I can tell. Okay, guys, we're about 11 minutes to the top of the hour. We do have time for more questions, and we've gotten some more in, so I do want to go through those. Regina is asking, are there any tools that are good to use to incorporate security in applications, or is this just a knowledge and education problem?
I mean, there's this company I've heard of called WhiteSource. It's a
WhiteSource
great tool. Other than us, right?
Yeah.
Because I think we can take that as just written. You need us. Look, there are several important pieces here. First off, you should be using some kind of AST solution. You could debate which kinds for all and which vendors, but honestly, any of them is better than nothing. Asked, I asked, pick one, do it, do something. The second part, I would say, is some level of dependency management. Interesting piece. The nice part is it's relatively inexpensive to go tackle, since most of the solutions are open source. But literally just trying to make sure that you're using up-to-date software in your software is massively important, very helpful. It's an easy tool to integrate in. I would very, very strongly suggest you look at something like Renovate, which lets you, for free, basically just say, hey, you have this version that you're using in the code. There's a new one. Here's a pull request. Click merge, update. Because the best way to reduce your vulnerabilities in your application are to make sure that the software that you're using has all of the fixes that are applied, that are public knowledge. And the best way to do that is to keep up to date on the versions. So dependency update management tools are really important, I think. And it's a good starting point, especially if you are, let's say, not one of those high performers who have unlimited budget, because free is a hard thing to compete with.
Yeah, I think Regina's question is actually, it does really illustrate the fact that there's still a lot of uncertainty in the space, and a lot of, we really do need to. It's imperative for all of us to really kind of further the education in general, so that organizations do have a knowledge base regarding what tools and technologies are out there to help further, securing applications and securing operating systems and securing, the infrastructure. So, definitely we need to further the educational aspect of DevSecOps and application security in general. So thanks for your question, Regina. Next question is an interesting one, and Sumi asks, what vulnerabilities can be taken into exception during release, and those that can be done later on?
Whew. This is one of those it depends answers that I hate giving, but I will state just as a fact, no two applications are the same. Mm-hmm. In general, I'm going to try to make a generality out of this. It should be based on something objective if you can. And the way I would suggest almost always doing that is literally labeling risk. Go back to the good old fundamentals of risk management, because that's what we were talking about. What level of risk am I going to find acceptable inside of my release? And look, that's really simple stuff. You understand the impact, you understand the likelihood. For a lot of vulnerabilities, let's just say CVSS score works great. It tells you something. It's not a bad place to start. You might say, as an initial policy, great, we'll let low severity vulnerabilities go through. We're going to make sure we remediate all high and medium. Really good starting point. Once you get a little bit farther down the maturity journey, though, it's not usually enough. You actually want to also include things like what area of the application it's in. You touched on that, right? It's just different, and it's more important to handle even a low severity vulnerability that's handling person identifiable information, or God forbid credit card data or something. A more mature, kind of the next step is risk level, severity, based on the application's use and the area that is being used for. But a good first step is just, hey, prioritize somehow and draw a line and then hold that line.
All right, great. So guys, we still have about 3 minutes or so for questions. So if you do have one, go ahead and send it in Right now, we don't have any other new questions in, but I'm going to leave the question and answer tab open in case we do get any stragglers come in. And while we're waiting to see if any others come in, just a quick reminder to the audience that today's event is being recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. All right, doesn't look like we are getting any more questions in. So I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. And again, I will continue to leave this open. So even if you do have a question and we don't get to it, please know that the folks at WhiteSource are getting a copy of all of the questions. Okay, we did just get one in the chat. Sumi, another question asks, at last, what would be the vision of application security in the future? So, just put on your wizard hat and use your magic 8-ball and, see, do we have?
I'll give you 2 stages. Yeah, I'll give you 2 stages. I think fundamentally, for the next 5 years, we're on a very predictable journey. This isn't the first area of even security inside software that's gone through this journey. You can look at things like network security, and you can use that to predict the future of application security. Next 5 years is us still figuring out the problem, still figuring out the tooling, still building the processes. But I think if you're talking 10 years from now, it looks a lot closer to what, not fully, but a lot closer to things like what the quality ecosystem looks like and things like the network security or even performance testing industries look like, which is, it's an understood problem with understood solutions, and there's some best practices that large chunks of people agree on, along with a deep understanding already just built in to the actual DevOps team of that security and that education. People coming out of school now understand this. It's drilled into them in the first bits. So anyways, that's just my opinion. I don't have a crystal ball, or I've already won the lottery and I wouldn't be talking to you.
All right then. All right. Well, like I said, those are some great questions that came in. Thank you all so much for sending in your questions. And then as one last time, if you do have a question, you can still go ahead and get it on in. If we don't get to it during the webinar, then definitely the folks at WhiteSource will get a copy of the questions that came in. Okay, and I already did the reminder that today's event is being recorded. So the only thing that I have left to tell you all is the fact that we are going to do the $25 Amazon gift card drawing now. So let's go ahead and do that. Yes. Okay. Our first winner today is Beth J. Congratulations, Beth. Our second winner today is William G. Congratulations, William. Third winner today is Myron L. Congratulations, Myron. And our fourth and final winner today is Lance K. Congratulations, Lance. We'll be following up with all 4 of you via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. If you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. Jeffrey and Lilach, thank you both for a great presentation. Love to see those survey results. I think it's very, very telling about where the industry is today and where it's headed. So thank you so much for sharing the information. So educational, so interesting. And Jeff, it's always a pleasure to do a webinar with you. And Lilach, thank you also for being his straight man, so to speak. So appreciate it. So
it's like a comedy duo. Yeah. Well, hey, thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.
Thank you very much.